I'm so glad we decided to do this series on um, the Sermon on the Mount. Things were hard when we started, but things just seem to get harder and harder. This has been a tough week, I think, for a lot of teachers and social workers. And we had the Republican National Convention where liberals were basically accused of trying to destroy cities and destroy America and hating God and the Bible. And this is changing our nation. A young man, 17 years old, listened to that rhetoric, and not long after having gone to a Trump rally, began to feel this calling to protect his community that he'd been told was under assault. And this was so confusing to the young man that he, in order to protect his community, crossed the state line with one of these paramilitary weapons and killed two people, as I remember, and wounded one. And you wonder, how do you find peace of mind? I mean, we certainly don't know what all to do yet, but however you feel politically about this nation, how do we have peace of mind and clarity and wisdom and some sense of joy in the middle of all of this tragedy and hatred? I'm so glad that we're walking through the Sermon on the Mount as a way of trying to remember how to heal our own hearts at times like this. And today we come to what is often called the Lord's Prayer. And it's, I think, going to be an interesting passage looking at it within this context of how do we heal our hearts? How do we discover the way of love in a very difficult time? I personally, my inner life, my spiritual life is more about meditation. I've never really related to the idea of talking to an invisible person, but I think there are other people who that's what works and makes their heart open up and soften. So they're obviously, I think, both valid ways. But there's a stoplight by my house that kind of reminds me of the frustration I had in my early days of trying to pray to this invisible person, to try to have a conversation to somebody who was, to say the least, the strong, silent type. There's this between Howard and Wells Branch. When I go from my apartment to Walgreens, there's a light, and they've recorded a message, and it sounds like what every Northerner thinks Texans sound like. It goes, "Please wait to cross Howard and Wells Branch. Please cross to Wells." And you can barely understand it anyway, even though I'm from Texas. And it's so frustrating because when you push the button to cross, it says, "Wait to cross Wells Branch and Howard. Wait to cross Wells Branch and Howard." And I almost have this conversation with the stop. I'm saying, I heard you. I know to wait. And then when the light changes, it goes, the light is green across Wells Branch and Howard. And it's like, I want to get into this argument with the stoplight saying, I know how stoplights work. Thank you. I don't need that much explanation. So that's obviously residual damage from earlier times and immaturity and all of that. At the same time, I think people feel that kind of frustration often when they're trying to live out a religion that isn't really respecting them, that isn't really something you can grow up and still hold on to. It's very interesting, this passage, something that I've never heard spoken in a pulpit before. When we talk about this prayer that Jesus is going to teach the disciples, is that they have to ask him how to pray, which, if you think about it, means he's not been doing it in front of them. He's not been doing it at least enough where they can understand what he's really doing. So I think when you look at Jesus' teachings on prayer, most of it's are warnings. Don't pile up words. Go into your closet. Don't make it a scene in front of other people. And I think the fact that they're having to ask him what he's doing means that he's not externally religious in a traditional sense. He's doing something important. They can see that. They can see that there's something that he is doing, that their only metaphor for it is prayer. But he's going to this deep place, particularly when he's in times of fear, times where he's being hated. There's a place within him. And whether he's having an inner conversation with this being, or whether this is a type of meditation that he's doing, it really doesn't matter. I think that has more to do with our temperaments. But when we go through this prayer, it can be very surprising, because he seems to assume that we know how to do it. It's sort of like in John, when one of the disciples is wanting to follow Jesus, and he says, "You know where I'm going. You know the way." And I think this is a hint. I think this is something where the followers of Jesus are trying to help us understand that Jesus isn't trying to tell us to do something that we don't know how to do. He's trying to illumine our own hearts. Each of us is an individual. Each of us is different. But what a great teacher like Jesus or Buddha, any of the great rabbis or Sufi mystics, is trying to help us feel from the inside out a kind of guidance mechanism that they assume we are all equipped with. So he seems to say, you already know how to do this thing. Now, what I hear that saying is that instead of the idea of God being a boss, and you're giving advice to the boss or asking for guidance to the boss, it's more a symbol of the roots of your own being. That word parent that's used there, I've seen in many mystical writings, particularly in the Nag Hammadi texts that were discovered in Egypt, that this is a symbol for whatever that mysterious ground that we come out of, whatever our mysterious source is. You don't even have to know what it is, and probably we can't know what it is. Is it an invisible human being? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because other beings also come out of it. But we can relate to it as human beings. Our humanness is a part of the path into that depth, whatever it is. So giving it a human face is a way of realizing that we are its offspring. But if it's our being, if it's the nature of our being, it's the principles of our being, then it's not something that we intentionally do. It's more like something we are. If you're going to learn how to jump off the high diving board, part of it is skill and technique, but gravity's going to do most of it. So if you think you're controlling that, there's a kind of an illusion there. So it's more like giving ourselves to this way, this path, this flow, this principle that constitutes us, but also gives us a kind of guidance. So this isn't something that we have to invent. It's something we already know how to do at some deep, profound level. And what Jesus is saying is let go of that which isn't really you. I think that's what he's saying. That being an authentic person, loving as an authentic person. The word that flows through this prayer is cutting off, letting go. It's often said, translated forgive, but I think it's more profound than that. It's letting go, first of all, of everything that isn't really authentically you. So you don't have to invent your own soul or your own heart. It's already there. But we have to learn to let go of that which isn't us. So then the second thing is we don't have to find it, which is good news. In a sense, what Jesus is waking us to is that we are part of the web of life. He talks about the kingdom. And I think what he's trying to say there is that we are members of one body, the one human body, but also ecological body, that we are parts of this larger life. And we have to be good citizens of that life. So a lot of what he's teaching in here is to realize that when we remember that we're part of one common life, we know a whole lot more what to do. As Americans, we're taught to think as individuals and separate beings. But when we remember that what we do to others, we do to ourselves, then we have a lot more wisdom to fall back on. One of my favorite quotes about all of this, Van Gogh said, "The way to find God is to love many things." The way to find God is to love many things. And I think it's helpful to realize that Jesus is teaching us to love, not like Mother Teresa, but it's more like when we fall in love as young people. And we're trying to talk to our parents about, how will I know the right person? And they keep saying, you'll know. Now, what they don't tell us, of course, is that you have to make a lot of mistakes sometimes to get to that point. But what is true in that and what's authentic in that is that there's nothing outside of you that can tell you what love is. And this is more like falling in love. It's more rapturous. It's more joyful than thinking of somebody who's sacrificially giving. The saints are some of the happiest people of all time. But what they've learned is this interwovenness, this interconnection is where joy and peace are found. What we can't do for ourselves, we can often do for each other. So I think the second thing that Jesus is saying is that you don't find the sacred. All you need to do is cut off or let go of that which separates you from other people. All the labels, all of the habits, all the things that keep you from being a part of the web of life is common. He speaks about the source, the Father, the Mother, this being out of which we come. And then he says our. So it's remembering that it's not just about us, that every being we run across is also an expression and an offspring. And that gives us tremendous guidance too. And then the final thing is to realize it isn't something that we have to make. The image that Jesus uses here is of bread. Daily bread, which draws up the image of manna. That there is an aspect of living, just everyday living in the present moment, that feeds your heart. There's something about living in the past that makes us sad. There's something about living in the future that can make us afraid. So coming to the present moment, dwelling on that which feeds our heart in the here and now, is a great way to find peace and depth for living. So I think what he's talking about here is not trying to make something through prayer, but letting go of whatever does not feed our hearts. Another one of my favorite sayings that I say probably 2 times a year, 3 times a year, is the times that do not make us happy may make us wise. And I think that's the attitude that feeds us. That we look to be happy, we look to be safe, we look for all of that. But when times are confused, we learn wisdom. When times are terrifying, we learn courage. When times are unfair, we learn justice. So to realize that a lot of our life is that learning and growing into this greater being. At a time like this, I think this is a lesson we need to learn. We need to realize that there isn't one formula for prayer. And you may not even think of it as prayer at all. You may not believe in God at all. But you do come from some depth. You do feel your interconnectedness with others. And life does speak to you in some ways. And I think it's these 3 forms of mysticism that Jesus is calling us to. Not to religion, not to theology, not to believing this or that, but to awakening to who we are. So in summary, I think what he's saying is we already know the way. That it's like a parent saying, you're not going to figure this out. You're going to grow into it. So prayer is not so much discovering something that somebody gives you. It's letting go of that which isn't authentic in you. Just simply doing that will release your heart to know, because whatever this source is, our heart is like a tractor beam to get back to it. So, and also, Jesus says we don't need to find it. We just need to let go of whatever separates us from nature and from other beings. And finally, that we don't have to make it. That whatever this sacred something is that gives us joy and peace, it's not a matter of having to craft something that we don't have. It's a matter of letting go of everything that does not feed our hearts. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.